a community in Cleveland with full of black kids who reported a gas leak in their apartment. And you know what happened? Because they live in a disenfranchised area, because it's full of black people, you know what the people did? They said, oh, no, don't worry about it. We're not going to send anybody to check it out. It's not a big deal. People smell gas all the time. And then their apartment exploded. I'm not being hyperbolic. I'm not joking. I know I'll say people's knees exploded. Their apartments literally exploded.
In Cleveland's Garden Valley neighborhood. On June 23rd, an explosion and fire displaced more than 40 families, sent multiple people to the hospital, and took the life of a man who was being deemed a hero for his efforts during the tragedy.
Shedeur Sanders was out there.
It seems that Deshaun Watson is the leader in the clubhouse. So A, is he the leader in the clubhouse? And B, what does Shedeur have to do to unseat him starting next week?
Yeah, I think to call him the leader in the clubhouse is fair, but also a little unfair, because I think that he's the veteran there. I think that obviously gives him that upper hand in leadership where over Shedeur, just because he's got that veteran experience of talking to guys and leading guys, and there are guys in that locker room who have watched him. But for Shedeur to take over this job, he just has to continue to show development. That's frankly it, and it's a very boring answer, but if you have a guy who you have the ceiling and it's there and you can start to imagine what you might be able to get out of him offensively, if he cleans up things, if he doesn't have to play, hero ball and make those mistakes that he was making last year in the interception department, if he can clean that up, make better choices.
How many quarterbacks, and we're just talking strictly quarterbacks, and he's a fifth-round guy at that, have been involved in the community as much as Shedeur, his first year and a half here. Through events, that one fire that happened down in the projects right here, I think it was off of 30th, that through an event for that, didn't tell nobody about it. Last second thing there, he's done all counts of little camps and charity stuff like that, like giving away cars.
Tired of the divisiveness. They're tired of after a man, again, who gave his money, paid for a private jet, who, by the way, kept his promise that he told the media, hey, me and Deshaun are working out, coming together as a team. Hey, I got to get from Miami back to Cleveland. Let's spend that PJ money. Let's get back there. When I get there, 500 people, 500 kids. They're tired of after a man, again, who gave his money, paid for a private jet, who, by the way, kept his promise that he told the media. Tony, nobody is good enough for me. Grossi, allow 92.3 and or ESPN Cleveland to, I don't even want y'all to hear it on the airwave. I have some alternative media that we're going to watch, some of my favorite media members, and we're going to stick to them. No more Mary Kay Cabot. No more Tony hangover glasses, domestic dispute, Rizzo. No more Tony, nobody is good enough for me, Grossi.
Let's talk about what actually happened. Not the version some television hosts keep recycling. Not the take designed to fill 30 minutes of afternoon radio. The real sequence of events, laid out in the right order with the right context attached. Shedeur Sanders travelled back to Cleveland on a private flight. He organised a free football camp for local children. Hundreds of kids showed up. The event cost those families nothing. Shedeur covered the expense himself, gave his time freely, and by multiple accounts, those kids had the kind of experience they will still be talking about years from now. And somehow, after all of that, the loudest conversation in Cleveland media was about the plane. Not the children, not the free event, not the quarterback who flew back on his own dime to keep his word. The plane. If you want to understand why Shedeur Sanders has now publicly named the media voices he no longer intends to give his attention to, that right there is your starting point. But it is not the full picture, not even close. To understand where this frustration actually comes from, you have to go back about a year before any of this happened. In June of the previous year, a gas explosion tore through a residential neighborhood in Cleveland. This was not a minor incident that wrapped up quickly and sent everyone home safely. More than 40 families were suddenly without stable housing. Multiple people required medical attention. And one man, described by those who were present as someone who acted heroically in the chaos, did not survive. That is a devastating community event by any measure. Real people lost stability overnight. Families were scattered. Children were uprooted. The kind of thing that, in a city with an active and vocal sports media presence, you might expect to generate some meaningful attention and platform usage to direct people toward resources, fundraising efforts, and ways to help. According to Shedeur, that is not what he witnessed from certain established Cleveland media outlets. His claim is specific. He says that some of the same personalities who now seem to find commentary on his every decision did not use their reach to highlight donation opportunities for the affected families. He says the loudest voices in Cleveland sports media were largely quiet during a moment when that community genuinely needed amplification. Meanwhile, Shedeur says he was physically present and involved in support efforts. He was not posting a graphic from his couch and calling it a day. He was showing up. And according to independent sources who were actually in those neighborhoods, that account checks out. A local Cleveland content creator who goes by Chef Z spoke about this directly and confirmed that Shedeur had been engaged in community work tied to that tragedy in ways that received almost no coverage from the major stations. No extended radio segments, no appreciative television discussions, no station-wide push to recognize what the quarterback was doing. Just silence. And that silence is the foundation of everything that has followed. Now come back to the present. Shedeur had publicly told Cleveland media that he and Deshaun Watson were going to train together during the off-season. He made that commitment in front of reporters. It was on record. When the time came to get from Miami back to Cleveland to follow through on that, he chose to take a private flight. Not because he wanted a dramatic arrival. Not because he needed the optics. He chose it because it was the fastest way to honor two separate commitments at the same time, the training session with his teammate and the free youth camp he had already begun organizing. He paid for the flight himself, he arrived, he worked out, he hosted the camp, he kept his word on both fronts. That should have been a complete story. Quarterback makes a promise to his teammate and to his community, pays out of pocket to make both happen, and shows up for hundreds of kids who otherwise would not have had that kind of access to an NFL player. Done, good story, positive news. But that is not what happened on certain radio stations and television programs. Instead, what emerged was a debate about whether the private flight was appropriate, whether Shedeur's approach to public visibility was too calculated, whether the camp was really about giving back or whether it was really about building a personal brand. Rex Ryan entered the discussion and criticized the situation, and that appears to have been the final push that moved Shedeur from privately frustrated to publicly finished. He looked directly into a camera and named the voices he was removing from his personal media diet. Tony Rizzo, Mary Kay Cabot, Tony Grossi. He was clear, he was calm, and he was done. Before anyone dismisses this as a young athlete overreacting to criticism, consider the math here for a moment. Shedeur Sanders is a fifth-round draft pick. He did not arrive in Cleveland as the guaranteed franchise cornerstone. He was not handed anything. He came in needing to prove himself at every level, competing for reps, learning a professional system, working to establish himself in one of the most closely observed quarterback rooms in the entire league. And during that same stretch, he was doing community work. Not once, not for a photo opportunity. Twice, 2 separate years of free football camps, involvement in community support after a neighborhood tragedy, charitable efforts that according to independent observers included giveaways and resources that never made it onto any major Cleveland platform in a meaningful way. How many fifth-round quarterbacks are doing this? How many players at any draft position are organizing back-to-back free camps while simultaneously fighting for a starting job in an NFL market that is watching their every move? This is not a player who got upset because one pundit had a hot take. This is a player who says he has watched an established pattern repeat itself over the course of more than a year, and that pattern goes like this. When the community work happens quietly, it stays quiet. When there is something that can be framed as a controversy, the volume goes all the way up. The camp becomes a branding exercise. The flight becomes a character question. the confidence becomes arrogance, the visibility becomes a problem. And meanwhile, the things that actually mattered to real people in real Cleveland neighborhoods apparently did not generate the same urgency. That is a legitimate grievance. It is not about needing validation. It is about noticing who gets the microphone pointed at them and when. Here is something worth understanding about how media coverage works, particularly for athletes in high-profile markets. Every time a player responds to a critical media personality, that response becomes content. It becomes a headline, a clip, a segment, and another full day of programming built around whatever the player said in reaction. The player's frustration becomes the story. The player's emotion becomes the angle. And the original criticism, however questionable it might have been, gets renewed life because the reaction gave it oxygen. Shedeur appears to understand this clearly. By saying publicly that he is done listening, he is not just venting. He is making a strategic decision. He is removing the one thing that keeps certain voices relevant in his orbit, his reaction. No response means no clip. No clip means no segment. No segment means less incentive to manufacture the next controversy. He said he intends to shift his attention to independent journalists and local content creators. People like Cameron Justice, who he mentioned by name as someone who actually puts in the work. People who show up in the neighborhoods, cover what is happening without needing it to connect back to a sports debate, and hold themselves to a standard of genuine community journalism rather than personality-driven programming. That is a significant distinction, and it suggests this is not an emotional decision made in a moment of frustration. It is a considered choice about which voices deserve space inside his head. One of the most important voices in this entire conversation is not a national analyst or a longtime sports columnist. It is a local Cleveland content creator who was actually present for the community work Shedeur has been discussing. Chef Z confirmed that Shedeur's involvement in Cleveland community efforts has not been a single carefully timed appearance. He described consistent engagement. He talked about the charitable work connected to the neighborhood tragedy from the previous year. He mentioned camps, giveaways, and resources being provided to local families. And he made the same point Shedeur has been making, that the major Cleveland platforms which track the quarterback's every professional move were not the ones leading the coverage of his community contributions. It was smaller, independent voices doing that work. When Shedeur heard someone from the community confirm this, the reaction was telling. It was almost as if he had been carrying around a frustration that he had started to question himself about, wondering whether he was reading the situation correctly. And then someone with no personal stake in defending him, someone embedded in the actual neighborhoods being discussed, said publicly that yes, the pattern he had noticed was real. That is not just a player having a bad day. That is a player who has been watching something unfold for over a year, had an outside observer confirm what he was seeing, and finally decided to say it out loud. Let's be direct about what Shedeur is actually identifying here, because it is worth naming clearly. There appears to be a version of coverage where every positive action a player takes is held up to a suspicion standard that rarely gets applied to the criticism itself. The camp is real, but is the motive pure? The flight is explained, but does the explanation make sense? The community work is happening, but is it really about the community? Meanwhile, the critical voices face no equivalent scrutiny. Their motives are not questioned. Their consistency is not examined. The fact that some of them reportedly went quiet during a genuine local crisis while remaining loud about a quarterback's travel arrangements does not generate the same level of investigative energy. That imbalance is what Shedeur is reacting to. Not the criticism itself. He plays quarterback in the NFL, and he knows what that means in terms of public scrutiny. But the selective application of that scrutiny, where a free camp generates more debate than a neighborhood explosion, is what has pushed him to this point. And it is worth asking, especially for those of us who consume sports media regularly, how often do we notice when that selectivity is happening? How often do we accept the framing we are given without asking what is not being covered with the same intensity? Shedeur Sanders still has everything in front of him professionally. The quarterback competition in Cleveland is real and ongoing. There are questions about his development, his accuracy, his ability to limit costly mistakes, and whether he can outperform a more experienced option in the same room. Those are legitimate football conversations, and they will continue regardless of what happens in the media landscape. But none of that changes what happened here. A young player did something genuinely good for a community. He paid for it himself. He organized it with clear intent. He showed up. And instead of that becoming the story, certain voices found a way to redirect the conversation towards something more comfortable for the programming format they were already running. Shedeur noticed. He kept noticing for over a year. And when the same pattern repeated itself after the second free camp, he made a decision that many athletes in his position have probably considered, but rarely stated this plainly. He named names, he drew a line, and he pointed people toward the kind of coverage he believes actually serves the community rather than just filling airtime. Whether you agree with every part of his argument or not, that level of specificity is difficult to dismiss as simple emotion. He is not claiming he should be immune from criticism. He is claiming that the criticism he receives has been applied in a way that does not reflect what he has actually been doing in that city. The question now is whether Cleveland, and the broader sports media world watching this unfold, pays attention to what he said, or simply turns it into the next clip designed to fill 30 minutes of afternoon programming. Community work done quietly, a free camp for hundreds of kids, a player who showed up after a neighborhood tragedy when others with bigger platforms apparently did not, a young quarterback fighting for his position while simultaneously trying to give back to a city that was not even his hometown. That is the full picture. The private jet was a sentence inside a much larger paragraph, and the people who turned that sentence into the entire story have now been publicly called out by the person at the center of it. Whether Shedeur is right about every specific claim, whether every media personality handled this poorly, whether the full truth matches his version entirely, those are fair questions. But the framework he is using, the idea that community coverage should not disappear when there is no controversy attached to it, that is not a radical position. That is just accountability, and it needed to be said. If you want sports coverage that goes beyond the surface narrative and actually examines what is happening and why, you are in the right place. Hit that subscribe button and join the Sports Zone USA community. Like this video if you think Shedeur's frustration is warranted, and drop your take in the comments below. Do these Cleveland media personalities deserve to be called out, or is Shedeur taking this too far? We read every comment and we want to hear from you. Sports Zone USA, where the real conversation never stops.